Yep.
Thank you, Senator Russell. I'll pass the call to Senator Roberts for return to the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing today, Mr Fletcher. How many health practitioners has AHPRA suspended for being outspoken contrary to the joint statement of 9th of March 2021?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. So, in relation to concerns that we've received about any aspect of the conduct of a practitioner related to COVID-19, 31 registered health practitioners have been suspended since the commencement of the pandemic, and of those, 10 of those suspensions were solely with reference to a breach or an alleged breach of the Code of Conduct related to the vaccination statement. And just to complete that, that's 4 medical practitioners, 5 nurses and 1 pharmacist.
Thank you. How many health practitioners have had their registration cancelled because of being outspoken contrary to the joint position statement of 9th of March 2021?
I might ask the General Counsel, Dr Jamie Orchard, to join me because, just to remind you, neither AHPRA nor the Medical Board or any of the boards has the power to cancel the registration of a health practitioner. A suspension is an interim measure while we investigate the concern.
Who has the power to cancel?
So that's done by the independent tribunal within each state and territory. So if we have a concern that there is professional misconduct, which is the most serious finding we can make, we then have to refer that to the tribunal, and it's only the tribunal who can make a decision about cancellation. Now, we've got, I think, 5 tribunal outcomes to date, but I'll just ask Dr Orchard to give you the details.
Jamie Orchard, I'm General Counsel of AHPRA. Senator, so far there's been a number of matters that have been referred to tribunal in respect to practitioners relating to COVID-related issues. We have 5 decisions so far from the tribunals. We can't go into the details of the other matters because they're still pending before the tribunals. So those matters relate to 1 dentist whose registration was suspended, a registered nurse whose registration was or who was disqualified. There was another registered nurse who had been the subject of suspension from the board but was not suspended by the tribunal. There was an enrolled nurse whose registration was suspended for 11 months. And there's one final matter where the tribunal has found professional misconduct but hasn't yet decided on sanction.
All 5 are associated with COVID?
All related to COVID in some way, but not necessarily solely in relation to making anti-vaccination statements.
How many health practitioners have either been suspended or had their registration cancelled because they made statements that supported the use of ivermectin in context with treatment of COVID-19?
We'd have to take that on notice, Senator.
Yes,
go and have a look.
In the 9th March 2021 position statement that threatens regulatory action for criticising the COVID-19 injections and or the national immunisation campaign, is it still in effect?
So, Senator, the statement you referred to, just to remind you of the context, was issued by all of the 15 national boards with AHPRA.
It's a joint statement.
So it's a joint statement. Essentially, it was issued in response to queries from practitioners about their obligations in relation to COVID-19 and vaccination. And the statement essentially aims to make clear how existing obligations on a registered health practitioner through codes of conduct and the like applied in the context of COVID-19 and vaccination, and that statement is still in force.
So it is in force. When can we expect this statement to be amended or removed in light of the best available medical scientific advice, which now shows the COVID-19 vaccines, the injections, to be unsafe and not effective? The risk-benefit is undoubtedly terrible.
So, Senator, the statement has always been aligned with the public health advice at the time, and we look to jurisdictional health departments, the TGA, ATAGI, as the primary sources of public health advice. And so we will certainly be consulting with them in the near future about the current status of that public health advice and whether any amendment to that statement is needed.
Health practitioners like GPs I'm about to mention, they've given me permission to use their names. Dr. Mark Hobart, 19 months. GP Registrar Dr William Bay, 9 months. Emergency Department Nurse, Registered Nurse Beulah Martin, 11 months. Continue to have their health practitioner registration suspended for allegedly engaging in conduct not supportive of the COVID-19 injections. Why are they still being punished?
So, Senator, we're going to need to be a bit careful about what we say publicly about individual matters, but I'll just ask Dr Orchard to comment about what we can say publicly about at least 2 of the practitioners.
The context is, why are they still being punished in regard to what's now emerging about the injections?
Let me ask Dr Orchard to explain what we can say publicly.
So, Senator, action in respect of any practitioners, including those that you've mentioned, that were taken by the relevant boards at the time to suspend those practitioners, was taken pursuant to the provisions of the national law, either for the purpose of preventing serious risk or in the public interest, and that's the basis on which they were suspended at the time. Now, those matters are currently still before the courts because there's appeals going on in respect of each of them, so we can't really go into further detail while the matters are still being considered by the courts.
So let's come back to national law in a minute. Despite lengthy delays in investigation and AHPRA's commitment to this Senate to achieve timely investigations, and keeping in mind that the Section 156 suspension powers under so-called national law are meant to be only an emergency and temporary measure for the most serious of threats to the health and safety of the public, how long can we expect AHPRA to keep maintaining the suspension of doctors and nurses and medical professionals around Australia who have expressed concerns regarding these vaccines, these injections, which now, in light of best available evidence, those concerns are well justified? You've been suppressing medical professionals, giving their honest advice and going against and forcing them to go against the Hippocratic Oath or to surrender.
So, Senator, I reject the assertion that you've made that we have in any way been censoring practitioners. What we have said in that statement is that we expect that people in dealing with patients use the best available evidence and their clinical judgment. That is an obligation that has been in the Code of Conduct for Registered Health Practitioners that predates COVID-19. There is no change in that. Suspension is an interim measure while we investigate, and it has to meet a legal threshold under the national law. And sometimes one of the reasons why suspension is extended or takes over a period of time is because a practitioner exercises their right to appeal that suspension, either to a tribunal or a court, and obviously while those appeals are underway, we put our work on hold. So, but essentially the suspension is there, as I say, to allow us on the one hand to ensure there is appropriate public protection, meeting a legal threshold under the national law while we investigate.
Are you aware that some of the country's best medical people, best specialists, are telling me that they are silent and changing their behaviour because they're suppressed by AHPRA? Are you aware of that?
I have read the commentary on that, yes.
Chair, can I just make a comment? Senator Roberts keeps asserting that there's new evidence that the vaccines are not safe or effective. We completely refute that suggestion. Well, there is no credible scientific evidence that the vaccines.
That's a false statement.
No, sorry, Senator. I'm going on the best available scientific evidence, and I don't think you should be able to make that statement continually.
I'll keep making a statement based on science.
Well, it can't be left unchallenged.
Senators,
He can challenge it, but I'm not going to.
Senator Roberts, I was listening carefully. Before you asked your last question, I was going to remind you that it's important that you put these as questions rather than statements. I believe you put not your last question, but the question before as a challenge, as a sentence without a question at the end of it. I think it's appropriate in that case for the witnesses at the table to respond, but the best way through this is to put questions and then we can hear answers.
No, I'm happy to show you my
I'll pass
questions.
back to you. Well, Senator Roberts, I was listening carefully. I'm happy to have a discussion if I misheard, but in not your last question, but the question before, I didn't hear a question put. I heard a statement put. But anyway, you have another supplementary question before I seek to move the call on. It just does assist the process of the committee if we frame this as questions and answers. I won't continue the rest of the spiel that I've been doing for the past 2.5 days.
Many health practitioners have been suspended under the Health Practitioner Regulation national law, the national law. Is it not true that such a singular national law does not exist, but in fact the national law is not a Commonwealth law at all, but a collection of state-based health laws such as the Health Practitioner Regulation National Law, Queensland, and Health Practitioner Regulation National Law Victoria.
So, do you want to? I'll defer to my General Counsel here to talk about
Senator,
the legal construct of the national scheme.
You're correct in saying that it's not a Commonwealth law. It's not. It's a piece of legislation. It's a cooperative piece of legislation amongst the various states and territories of Australia. So that the legislation is initially passed, and any amendments that are passed through the Queensland Parliament, and then the various states and territories have different mechanisms by which they apply both the original law but also any amendments to that law in their own jurisdictions.
So then, if so, how can so thank you for agreeing or confirming. If so, how can AHPRA accurately and lawfully enforce one national law across Australia when there are in fact not one national law? There are many state laws, each with their own amendments across each state and territory of this Commonwealth. We have state laws being enforced by a national body responsible to the states.
I will say, Senator, when you talk about the differences, the very limited differences across the various jurisdictions, it does operate largely as a single national law across the country, subject to some exceptions, of course. We ensure that in the course of our role, our regulatory role in applying that law, we do so consistently across the country so that it operates in a sense in a seamless way, so that for practitioners who are operating in one jurisdiction, they're able to move into another jurisdiction, continue their profession without having to worry about the difference in the state laws that might apply to them.
Senator